ponder while we're reading this excerpt. The question is, let me get out of the way there. Why is it important to gather sufficient evidence and recognize how others' experiences and prior knowledge build on my own? What we're going to do is we're going to read a little excerpt from a Sherlock Holmes short story, and we're going to talk about evidence. And I'm bringing this out because as we begin to explore English this year as ninth graders, we want to explore it as a detective would. And I'm hoping that this passage will start to get our minds thinking in that way. So go ahead and turn to your passage, and what we're going to do is I'm going to read it out loud. And as we go through, we'll make clarifications so that you kind of get the gist of what's happening, and then we'll just talk about it for a while and see what we can learn about the importance of gathering sufficient evidence and recognizing that what other people have seen and have to say about what they see will affect what we know about things. So here we go. This is Adventure 3, A Case of Identity. Before I get started, who can tell me a little bit about Sherlock Holmes? What do you know?
He's from London.
Yeah?
He's a detective. He's got a sidekick named Watson.
Watson, that's right. Good. Is he real? Did he really live back in the day? No? What were you going to add?
Well, the stories are told from the perspective of Watson.
Right, good. So he's fictional. These are fictional characters. And Watson, his sidekick, is the one who tells the stories. So we're hearing this all from Watson's point of view. Okay, here we go. Well, before we start, one more thing. Any information you have on kind of their personalities at all? Holmes and Watson. Yeah.
Holmes is eccentric and a little crazy and super smart, and if I'm remembering correctly, and Watson is a little more reserved and like smart in the sense that he thinks about consequences and
maybe has a little more of a conscience.
He's safer.
Okay, good. How many of you have seen the recent movies, Sherlock Holmes movies that have been out in the theaters in the last, I don't know, how many years? 10, 7? I don't know how long it's been. Yeah, so those give us an idea of the characters too, because many of us have seen those. Okay, here we go. This is the very beginning of this story, the opening paragraphs, and it's called A Case of Identity. "My dear fellow," said Sherlock Holmes as we sat on either side of the fire in his lodgings at Baker Street, "life is infinitely stranger than anything which the mind of man could invent. We would not dare to conceive the things which are really mere commonplaces of existence. If we could fly out of that window hand in hand, hover over this great city, gently remove the roofs and peep in at the queer things which are going on, the strange coincidences, the plannings, the cross purposes, the wonderful chain of events working through generations and leading to the most outre results, it would make all fiction with its conventionalities and foreseen conclusions most stale and unprofitable." What's he saying? Who can summarize that for me?
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Truth is stranger than fiction. It says the most outre results. What does outre mean? Does anybody know? It's a French word.
Others, no?
Yeah, but more of a startling, like surprising kind of other, like something that kind of takes you aback. Okay, so basically Sherlock is saying, like you said, real life is way more interesting than anything somebody can make up. And if we could hover over the city and open up the roofs and look inside the homes, that's what we'd see. Okay? Okay, so we continue. Next paragraph. "And yet, I am not convinced of it," I answered. So this is Watson. "I'm not convinced. The cases which come to light in the papers are, as a rule, bald enough and vulgar enough. We have in our police reports realism pushed to its extreme limits, and yet the result is, it must be confessed, neither fascinating nor artistic." So what's Watson's reply, to Holmes? Yeah.
They've seen plenty of weird stuff, and fiction's still preferable.
Okay, so he's not buying what Sherlock is saying at this point. Good. Okay, moving on. A certain selection and discretion must be used in producing a realistic effect, remarked Holmes. So, okay, I hear you. This is wanting in a police report. To everybody who is absolutely puzzled throughout 3 continents, you are brought in contact with all that is strange and bizarre. But here, I picked up the morning paper from the ground. Let us put it to a practical test. Here is the first heading upon which I come. A husband's cruelty to his wife. Here is half a column of print, but I know without reading it that it is all perfectly familiar to me. There is, of course, the other woman, the drink, the push, the blow, the bruise, the sympathetic sister or landlady. The crudest of writers could invent nothing more crude. What's happening there? What is Watson saying? What did he pick up and read? The newspaper. And what did the newspaper have to say? What was the heading?
Husband's cruel to his wife.
Husband's cruel to his wife. And so what did Watson do with that heading? Did he keep reading and find out about what it said?
No.
What did he do?
He already knew.
He said, I already know. I've heard this story a million times, right? He said he already knew. Here's Holmes' reply. He says, indeed, your example is an unfortunate one for your argument, said Holmes, taking the paper and glancing his eye down it. This is the Dundas separation case, and as it happens, I was engaged in clearing up some small points in connection with it. The husband was a teetotaler, there was no other woman, and the conduct complained of was what he had drifted into the habit of winding up every meal by taking out his false teeth and hurling them at his wife, which you will allow is not an action likely to occur in the imagination of the average storyteller. So as we've read through that, let's return to our question. Why is it important to gather sufficient evidence and recognize how others' experiences and prior knowledge build on my own, on what I know? What do we glean from this story? Yeah.
About a month ago, I looked up the word teetotaler.
Yeah.
And it's somebody who doesn't drink
Drink at
alcohol.
all.
And I've got a friend like that, and so I have like some prior knowledge. And so like, man, this husband, he didn't even drink. So I like connect to this story a little bit.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I'm really happy I know that word.
And you know, here's the thing. When Watson picked up this paper and read the heading, he made a lot of assumptions, but Holmes had the truth. Have you ever been in a situation where you've made a lot of assumptions, and then when you got more information from others that were involved, discovered there was a lot more to it, and that really you were off base and really weren't expounding the truth? Can anybody share an experience like that? Where things really changed once you had gathered sufficient evidence? Yeah, Joan.
Every single time I've decided I disliked a student, I found out about their home life. Every single time.
And it's changed the way you view him, them. Yeah. What else? Even in Sherlock Holmes' summary of what actually happened, did he just know all that information, or who did he have to communicate with and get evidence from to find out that information? Who are the people involved, even in this little one-sentence explanation? Who are the people that we needed to hear from in order to have good evidence of what happened?
Well, we don't know exactly who he talked to, but he happened to be involved in the specific case. So, interestingly, he didn't read past the headline either.
Right, because
At least as in the scene as presented. He didn't read past the headline either. But he had been involved in trying to clear up some details.
he was engaged in clearing up some small points in connection with it, the text says. Okay. So as we go into our English unit this year, what are some things, how can you act like a Sherlock Holmes as we read text? And when we read something, is it just enough to know what we think about it or how we feel about it, or do we need to extend ourselves to those around us and hear what they have to say as well in order to gather sufficient evidence to draw conclusions? What do you guys think? Yeah, one then the other.
I think we, our court system is kind of built around that, where we have juries and, all the different, facets of evidence gathering and presenting of evidence, and I think that's kind of conducive to that line of thinking.
Yeah, we need to know more than just what we think or what we've observed in order to have an accurate picture. Good. What were you going to say?
I was going to think about books that I've read in class before and always have a better understanding after talking about it with peers and hearing their insights.
Yeah, absolutely.
You understand it better too.
Good. So this begs the question, have you ever been misunderstood or suffered superficial judgments? Or have you been on the other end and doled out superficial judgments? Looked at somebody and immediately really misunderstood, kind of like Joan alluded to with some students, like we see something on the surface and we pass a judgment, or we get this feeling and we don't recognize that there's so much more going on. And that is the challenge as we work through our English classes. We read texts like To Kill a Mockingbird, Romeo and Juliet, that we look at the evidence from many sides, that we consider all the different points of view as we dive into our text, that we take on the role of a Sherlock Holmes on one hand and the role of a Watson on another, and we discuss it freely together. In closing, I'd just like to share a personal story kind of along this line. I was on my way to a Bible study years ago, like 15 years ago, and I pulled into a convenience store and I parked real quick and I was going to hop out and grab something to drink before I went on to this Bible study. And next to me was this convertible with this, I say older man, probably a man in his 40s, with these young women, and they were kind of like hanging all over him, and they were really loud music and all this, and man, the judgments that went through my head, right? Tons of them, like about who is this guy and why are all these girls with him and all these things. So I got out of the car about the same time they were getting out of the car, and we were walking to the door, and this man opened the door and he turned around and he said, "After you," and he gave me the sweetest smile, and I felt immediately condemned. And I thought, there's more to this guy than I was giving him credit for. And so as we go into our class time this year, always hold out the possibility that there's much more than you initially see.
Thank you.